Okay, this is a video titled The World Before White People, as if Caucasians don't go back to primordial times and out of cavemen and everything. We also know light-skinned genes go back over 600,000 years. That old lie can stop. They try to twist some information where they say it looks like blue-eyed people from around the Black Sea and Upper Caucasus region ended up spreading into humanity, and they're all related. Doesn't mean that that was the first pale or blue-eyed people in any way, shape, or form. But blacks try to use that disgustingly in their arguments for that they were anything but West African primitives. Let's see what this black lady has for it. Starts on a bad foot. After so many histories of non-white people by whites, does your book seek to correct the imbalance? Does your book... well, since they're pointing at one book, it must be talking about the Bible, which is, of course, about Caucasians. And it wasn't about the whole world. It was about a localized flood and everything. People have realized this long, long ago. Blacks worshiping the Caucasian god of the Caucasian Bible, or if they're in Islam, worshiping the Caucasian gods of the Caucasian Bible, or Nubians worshiping in Egypt, that would have been the Caucasian gods of those two. And so does that book correct the imbalance? I'm not sure if that's the book she's talking about, or if she wants to have other history books which all of a sudden lie about Negroids and correct an imbalance of them having very little history and have not done anything in comparison to all the Caucasians that heralded humanity and could fly now. So it's kind of strange premise on the first part and kind of telling. So let's just go ahead and get in this and see what she has to say.
It's not an attempt to correct an imbalance, but I think it may function that way. For me, it was an answering of questions. I started with a question I couldn't answer. Why are white people called Caucasian? Why? So that was where I started asking questions, and it went...
That's why you started asking questions. Why are Caucasians called Caucasian? Okay, well, let's go into this first so we don't have to worry about this after. Caucasian race. So it's looked at as there was a people around the Caucasus region that it seemed like it all spit out from, and they loved this idea because it went with a biblical concept of Noah having landed in those type of mountains and everybody spreading out from there, so it had to do with it. They want to mention here that Caucasian race, also called Caucasian or Europeoid, because most of them are in Europe now, and people seem to think that all the other guys like Arabs and things like that aren't part of the Caucasian race. It's odd, but you'll see a lot of black people try to say things like that, or that North African Caucasians aren't Caucasians, like Europe Caucasians, and they try to pull that on you. And I just recently did a series of videos where blacks were on my video trying to say that they were always North Africans and they were the Berbers and they were the Moors and all that. But this will show you the difference of that whenever we look into it. For Caucasoid has been an umbrella term for phenotypically similar groups of these different regions, with focus on skeletal anatomy, especially cranial morphology, over skin tone. So not talking about pale as the sheet of paper behind this. For I myself, if it shows up, or a deep cardboard color, and I don't even go out in the sun, and I do get a lot darker if I get out in the sun in 10. And man, if I play golf all summer, I'm a rich Mexican kind of 10. So wow, it just ditched. Okay. So ancient and modern Caucasoid populations were thus not exclusively white, but ranged in complexion from white skin to dark brown. And so when we're talking about Caucasians, and blacks try to talk about them, they want to try to say, well, anybody darker than paper white has to be something other than a Caucasian or a white and everything. And it's also confusing for them. For what they're really trying to do is put themselves into ancient civilizations and claim somebody, and they're confused. Whenever West African primitives were only West African primitives and they didn't know Egypt existed, weren't part of the Moors or anything like that. So, they use this through the 19th and 20th centuries so they could classify people from ancient skulls as we were going through dinosaurs and people and trying to figure out our ancient past. And it was very simply to see that current populations and old populations and where they connected to and whether they were Caucasoid or their counterparts, Negroid or Mongoloid, and their differences of them. And it got so easy that somebody could just look at a skull for a couple of seconds and tell you who and what kind of people they were. And you didn't even have to tell them where they came from. This guy could probably tell you that, for if he had enough examples in front of him, it would be easy to tell. This also helped to try to formulate, before we had genetics, migrations and things. And it was basically like this and pottery and certain things that we had. And of course, there was a conjecture on whether these people picked up pottery from these other people, whether they just got it out of trade, or is that the same damn people? Well, they're still over here. Does that mean it's not still the same people? For it could be half of them moved over here. There could be a lot of things happening, and they really couldn't totally give an exactness to it. And genetics is now making that much more easy to see. There's this social construct nowadays of the white race, and conflagration of Caucasian with white is also demographically misleading, since the category Caucasoid includes various populations such as South Asians and Ethiopians that are not even considered white in a social sense, but they have so much phenotype to them that they kind of look Beyonce and don't look like a regular Negroid. And so genetics also shows they have 40 to 50% admix, and that's what imparts their look on them. But the ancient Ethiopians, if you look it up in the Greeks and what they talked about in the Bible and stuff, has nothing to do with Negroids. For even just the term itself shows you where they are, and they talked about them in the Iliad and the Odyssey and all these type of things. So, whenever we look at this, where does it tell you at it? So Christoph Miners originally referred to a narrow sense the native inhabitants of the Caucasus region and the outline of history. German philosopher Christoph Miners first used the concept of Caucasian race in his wider racial sense. Miners acknowledged the races Caucasian are beautiful and the Mongolian of being somewhat ugly. The Caucasian race encompassed all of the ancient and most modern native populations of Europe, the Aboriginal inhabitants of West Asia, including the Phoenicians, Hebrews, and Arabs. Oh no, snap. Here's a tissue. The Autochthones, meaning endemic people of northern Africa, Berbers, Egyptians, Abyssinians, and neighboring groups, which are all Caucasians at the time. Yeah, Ethiopia used to be called Abyssinia. Now it's twisted, and black people try to use it weirdly, and other people try to use it weirdly too, as if that's what was going on in ancient times, but it had nothing to do with it. The Indian people, and the ancient Guanches, and of course these are those incredibly tall, well, cut the picture off, but they're Jesus-looking, incredibly tall people, said to have had light features and hair and stuff, and almost a Cro-Mag variant, and I've done videos about them too. And so now we can see that clearly in the explanation here, they're describing Caucasians as being all over the place, not just one little mountain area, but also that they're all the Autochthones of northern Africa, above the Sahara, Berbers, Egyptians, Abyssinians, and neighboring groups, and this is Caucasians. Yeah. Now, people get a weird idea later, and they talk about Caucasians are only the palest of Europeans and all this, and try to be an elitism and say that the other people had gotten admixed from lesser people, and that made them lesser of each other, and we can kind of see that verification going. But I think that's pretty good. I mean, this guy talks about Georgia and the people of area of Georgia and everything, how they seem to be somewhat going along with that idea, and Kuhn's idea too. So we can see Caucasians were all of North Africa, and then all of Europe, Yemen, all the way into India, all the way up. And strangely, they try to show Asians a lot more than they were, but they do show that Caucasians were in Japan at ancient times and created it. That's for another video, guys. And they don't show that this blurb comes over much more in the Tarim Basin mummies and the pyramids that are there, and the fact that some of this little green blob looks like it made it over into North America, at least in Africa, but way before Clovis people and stuff, but that's another endeavor altogether. And of course, Iceland and the things that connect over here, but not showing you that these are Caucasians now. This is an earlier map, and the way things were, and Negroids were only down in this area here at the time, way before um, the Bantu expansion and so on. And the Capoid race was what you would call um, the uh, Khoisan type of people, and now their range is much smaller for the Bantu expansion, just really drove in them. And they aren't mentioning the pygmy population here or the Nilotics really as a separate part. But so we can see that there, and we also can see that if we just look, and I don't know why it went back to the map, guys. And if we just look at where they're saying this all is, we can see again Europe, Western Asia, the middle and Levant, Asia Minor, and so on. Central Asia connecting to that and up into China, Russia connecting down to close to India, bacteria range, and so on, Afghanistan. South Asia, yes, so it runs into India and through it. Of course, as they show, all of North Africa was all endemic Caucasians too, and into Egypt, just like it shows, but also showing the Horn of Africa in ancient times too, and trying to make you clearly aware that that's not the way it was now as it was in olden times. And so, Caucasians, it's a strange thing, but let's see what she tries to equate it to. And of course, she wanted some kind of unity and fairness, so I don't know what she's going to try to get out of this. It seems like it's leaning real hard already, doesn't it, guys? And we're only one sentence into it.
From one thing to another.
Where and when did the concept of whiteness originate?
About it. One is just to notice that there's some people who are kind of light-skinned, and other people who are kind of brownish, and the people who are kind of darkish. So people notice that, immediately. But
the Greeks noticed it too, and Ethiopians, and how they were tanner people and more like rednecks and stuff, and so they even denoted simplistic things like that, and people that were living along those lines and not so much merchants. Hell, if they didn't shave their face or learn Greek, they were barbarians. And nowadays we always look at barbarians as being, oh, they were cavemen, ugh, and no, it didn't even mean that at all. For barbers aren't necessarily like that. And Barbarossa means red beard, and it has to do with that and the Berbers, and it really wasn't supposed to be that. Conan the Barbarian, think about it. Was he that barbaric? Well, he didn't wear much clothes, and he was kind of raised up. But hold on, if you look at the story, he was from a great people, stolen from somebody and raised up as dumb, and then taught other things and stuff, and the riddle of steel and so on. So that can't really be connotated correctly. But if you listen to the intro to that, and long before the sons of Arius and all these type things he mentions there, it really gives a hint to some truth and reality of things. And people talked about tanning and things like that way ancient. In the Bible, there's a place that blacks like to use to try to interject themselves into the Bible they're not a part of, by this one statement, oh, do not look upon me, Israel, for I am dark yet comely. And they're like, see? But they never want to read the rest of it, because she sounds like she's apologizing. But what's the deal? Well, she says, the sun hath looked upon me. Oh, so Shamash, as it says in there, and that's the sun god, and Sumerians and everything, and people worship the sun and everything, these Caucasian sun worshippers. So that's that Shamash, Shams, or Shamson, Samson, all goes together, and these Nazarites that grow out their hair like Jesus. So what's the deal there with that? Well, yeah, she's just tan. She goes on to say, my brothers forced me to work in the vineyards, and that's the reason I'm tan. And she's trying to apologize to the Israelite people for just a tan. So what could a black person like this do in that situation? Well, they couldn't apologize for it. But if we look at all ancient Egyptian art, Greek, Minoans, and everything, they always draw the male as being red ochre and the female as symbolically pale. And so we have that ideal of paling of skin. And a woman doesn't have to work. For once we got through hunter-gathering and things like that, a woman doesn't have to go out and put herself where a wild creature might attack her and stuff. We've got that kind of covered. In fact, did the women just go out alone? No, it probably didn't happen either. You wouldn't do something so foolish. But she's trying to somehow say that the idea of pale or Caucasian showed up later. It's a strange thing. It's starting to smell a little bit Marxist. Can you smell it?
But since there wasn't a lot of motion around from one's town or one's village, that didn't come up very much. So some
Oh, yeah, no, you have Herodotus and stuff that goes around to everywhere. What's noted, even in Herodotus's map, is they don't show sub-Saharan Africa, so they didn't even really know Negroids existed or what we're talking about them today, and probably related to you yourself. I doubt you're East African or Nilotic in any way, so it probably has more to do with you, and there might be a reason that you're trying to push forward this objective.
somebody like Herodotus, for instance, who did travel,
Ah,
he could say that, for instance, the Scythians who made quivers out of the arms, the skinned arms of the people they vanquished, that man's skin is very showy and white. So it was clear that people were light skinned.
well, it's pretty clear that during that time, yeah, they were light skinned, but he also talks about Ethiopians and the definition of Ethiopia and where they all go to, and they're denoted as not having light skin. So Negroids try to take this out of context and go, oh my God, blacks was everywhere. And we're going to look at what Ethiopia, they spell it with an Aethiopia. Ethiopia of the Greeks. And so now we see the Ethiopia of the Greeks is known at first, and yeah, there's references to the Nile, but Homer says things in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and Greek historians talk about them all over. And where are they in all the brown spots? Well, looks like at every river valley there is around the world, and even the Caucasus. So these Caucasians are tanned, and damn, all these farmers are tanned up here, and it's really kind of what Ethiopian meant, and it did not mean the people that live up in this area today, not over there. Look how they show the Nile bends off the Atlas Mountains, and it even says in some of his maps Atlantes, so it shows you they had hooked it up to there. And so basically everybody on this map, which doesn't show sub-Saharan Africa exists, they're talking about Caucasians everywhere, everywhere on here. So sure, there's South India, and then there's the Asians far past the Scythians, but the known world was all Caucasians and everything. I'm sorry if you didn't know this is true, and this is the way people show. And they also talk about microbians, which are tall, fair-skinned Caucasians that live long lives, he talks about, and everything too. So this, again, shows you more of the reality of what's told about the Horn of Africa, and like I said before, it's Caucasians. So let's just go back to her again, because we want more of what she says. We just wanted to lead that in so there can't be any after the fact speaking and lies and stuff. What else you got?
But to make it into something called a race or a variety, and then to endow that with certain characteristics, racial temperament, for instance, the latter kind of way of dealing with race, that's an invention of the Enlightenment of the 18th century.
Oh my God, did she just say that figuring out that maybe Negroids were more primitive and more violent, they didn't ever figure this out until the 18th century? Did she try to pull that one off? For the very first indications of them were that they were savages and primitive. They would even eat each other. Crazy stories come out of that and everything before they were westernized and brought up from a pre-Stone Age level. That's incredible. She's got to be dense, or she's trying to push an agenda. Oh yeah, I can smell it now. Yeah, I can smell it. Doesn't smell too good. How did Enlightenment era notions of race develop? No, look, they had notions of race, and it was way the hell before that. Surely, seriously, somebody's not trying to push this agenda. You know, the Negroid race was considered subhumans until recently and stuff, and Asians were looked at a certain way, and India people were looked at a certain way, and Eskimos were a certain way, and Amerindians, of course, were a certain way. And you're going to say hundreds of years after all that, people came up with the idea, maybe some of these are a little different. And that's, wow, that's way off in left field. Huh. She's pushing it.
When we think of science, science is a truth that's true no matter what, no matter when, and for all time.
Like genetics that proves that the Egyptians were Caucasian, and the science that led to what I just showed you there, that all the North Africa was Caucasians and where everything comes from, and so on like that. It's not necessarily biblical. You tried to go off that, and they tried to correlate the two, and it kind of fell apart, so then it has to be separated, and it's continued on. Thousands of years later, we still seem to be somewhat in a fog and somewhat lost in this primordial idea where we're not too sure of the way it works. It's kind of an amnesia effect, but let's continue.
And science, as the kind of gospel truth, replaces the gospel, which was religion. Before,
Yeah, it's a gospel truth. I don't know. You're trying to make connections here that's actually separate from each other. It says in the Bible the world was flat like a snow globe, and then there's a dome, there's water in space, and it comes down, and all kinds of things that aren't really actually logical, but you can understand how an ancient primordial people thought along those lines. This all hooked up to Sumerians, some ancient beliefs that they had, the way the groundwater flooded up and so on. But when they described the firmament, it's believed that they were talking about how it's snowy in the north clime and snowy in the south clime. So it has a firmament above, a firmament below, and then later some people said, "Oh, what's he trying to?" And they took it to weird ideals. Although they do have this idea of the dome that holds back space and things like that, and air, and even gods that are controlling it and stuff. And later on, Tiamat's ribs are placed up doing the same thing. And this connects all Proto-Indo-European people and this same similar knowledge that goes around. But what else are you going to say?
before science, before the 18th century, religion answered the questions.
Before science, before the 18th century. So you're not considering that there was any science during the Renaissance or any time before, that Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, all that stuff didn't exist, and even all the way back into the ancient Greeks and everything and stuff, some Sumerian stuff we can see as definitive science. They had trigonometry, blah blah blah. Not going to go with that. Science just popped up like popcorn last century. Okay. I'm gonna have to need a nose clip here. This is starting to smell. Can someone light a candle?
And so in the 19th century, for instance, there was a real jostling between science and religion over the truth. And this is why Darwin was so controversial.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Yeah, Darwin stepped out and said, "Yeah, you've been seeing all these dinosaurs, and everybody's told you that they're older than 4000 BC. So the Bible thing is not really meant to be a be all end all and everything encompassed and stuff, and the start of the world or anything like people have twisted it into nowadays. And let's just get back to reality. Hold on, let's go back into these other pagans here and see how it all works together. Okay, now we have the reality. Oh, they couldn't do that because they can't say it comes from paganistic type things. And so then again, we're left in a fog, and people are still teaching 2,000-year-old and 1,000-year-old analogies and type of things to people that are way past that and their mental structure and their ability to cognate. So it kind of can ruin itself. Mark Twain said, "Man, if you want to be an atheist, just read the Bible real good," something along that line. But that doesn't mean that the stories of the Bible aren't connected to some things that are true, and it's not a heritage that's now pulled all into one, but actually enveloped all of the ancient people of the known world in some way. But that's only about Caucasians, and so now people are trying to destroy it that aren't Caucasians and things in ways that she's speaking now. And that's strange because I smell that says the biblical people are attached to this type of knowledge coming out, but yet they're trying to discount it at the same time. This is strange. Can you smell that?
But by the 19th and 20th century, science and taxonomy had created categories, all sorts of things. Carolus Linnaeus, 18th century, is the father of taxonomy, that is, of categorizing things.
Yeah, when I've done all my fish studies and everything, I can basically name the Latin name of fish pretty much every fish that's at least in the aquarium hobby and stuff, and dolphins, Sphrena lewini and stuff. I just go like crazy. Not Nemo and Dory. I'm talking about obscure fish. You could flip through a huge atlas and go, name that one, and stuff, and I can tell you the genus and species and quite often where they come from and so on. But Linnaeus was real famous in that part too. It's amazing these explorers were catching fish and naming them from exotic places around the world and their variants of each other. And Carl Linnaeus is well known. There's a lot of fish that are known as Linnaeus. There are lineatus, which have lines on their body and not that, but there are fish and all type of creatures that are named after Linnaeus himself.
And so that science of categorizing things comes out of the 18th century, comes out of the Enlightenment, and counts up everything and gives it a name, including people.
Before race became taxonomized, was there no racism as such? The slave trade had already happened way before this, and they knew, and they talked about them as being illiterate primitives and pre-Stone Age level type people. So there would have been something like that. And then, hell, the Caucasians didn't get along with themselves in this area. We can clearly see through all of history. But yeah, they had problems at different times with other ethnicities. In fact, the whole Mahabharata story of India and everything shows a conflict of the darker people of the South and the Aryans and how that all went on. But it's still tried to be overlooked today, just like the fact they had a swastika and swastikas carry all around. And when I showed you that Proto-European blurb of green that might have gone over into America, strangely, American Indians also still had this same symbology, which can be stretched across everything on that map that was in the green area and the purplish blue area, but really not into Negroid areas. They didn't have that symbology or anything. It's really nothing they had to do with. I mean, like it shows, people didn't know they existed until much later. So that form of racism didn't, of course, exist until anybody knew them. But Egypt itself is clearly shown as not liking the Nubians. They called them vile Nubian troglodytes, which means primitive, unaware cave or hole dwellers. And they said that they were, not very intelligent and blah, 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 and all these bad things about them. And it's amazing the blacks try to claim Egypt whenever it's what they're talking about. It's amazing. Look at the earliest statues. If you just look up blue-eyed Egyptians, you see the earliest of Egyptian statues ever made during the first dynasties, and they have these crystal blue eyes and so on. And so you really couldn't try to pull that off, pale women and so on. But amazingly, I had one recently tell me, well, the men were all Negroes, but they love pale women and stuff, and that's just disgusting. That just shows you their thoughts and where they're trying to work their way out. It's hilarious.
Not so much racism, because race hadn't been invented yet, but
race hadn't been invented yet. Man, that's going to be hard to choke down with anybody that's got any type of IQ at all, lady. Race had been invented apparently before we classified it. Race had been invented long before you're trying to talk about, and the concept of who is this and who is that. Herodotus shows leanings of such very simply. In fact, he's comparing Caucasians to Caucasians and their slight variations on a theme and stories they told of each other. And it's not meant to be straight history, but it's hearsay. These guys say this. These guys say they're the earliest of humans. These guys say giant ants mine their gold for them. These guys say there's cattle. They're so big of horns they have to walk backwards to graze. So we can see some of that. But yeah, he's the father of the starting of trying to get histories all together. But man, after we've gotten so good at it now, after thousands of years, you want to try to pull this crap and something like race is just brand new and nobody ever thought of anything till last century. And man, I'm going to have to start holding my nose here. Somebody light a match.
The big differences were religious. So on the one hand, Catholics and Protestants, on the other hand, Christians, Jews, and Muslims.
Oh, so this is Caucasians having conflict within themselves about the religion that's all the same Abrahamic religion and everything. Yeah, well, of course, we know that the Islam-Muslim thing came much later, and Muhammad came much later before the story, so he's a deviate out of that, but he seems to be a prophet thing, not necessarily like a Jesus type thing, but whatever, we'll just let that go. But it doesn't involve Negroids in any way. They aren't part of the Bible. and it was all about Caucasians and stuff. But and if you said that nowadays, oh my God, that's racist, and it's like, no, that's just the facts. That's just straightforward. If facts are racist, then we've got to rename that racist word. Maybe we should call it other person's jealousy. Other person's inadequacy and inferiority complex makes them feel bad. But it's not racist. And racist is whenever you hate the other person for it. And if you hate the other person for heralding mankind and helping the whole world out and becoming spacemen now, that would be pretty disgusting and selfish. But it happens so much nowadays. You couldn't believe the way media tries to drive certain situations and to believe a way it used to be. Let's continue.
So religion was the big defining factor before race. And in fact, as we see in our own world, religion still plays a very important part. And it plays a part in a way that race does, in that you can say that somebody has a particular religion, and then that conjures up all sorts of other ideas about what's in that person, how that person thinks, how that person goes through his or her everyday life. What
Yeah, I could see that where you could say, well, Islamic people, and you can see what they do versus Christians and how they've done so much for the world and help them out and things and the way that all happened. And if you go back through history and the idea that Islam ran over ancient Caucasian lands which had turned Christian, and then they had the Crusades and everything that came out of that and what comes out of it, you could sure see some animosity between these people. It's amazing they're trying to unbabbilize the world and work together, and I believe it's the Caucasians are driving it. They also ended slavery for all people and tried to make the world follow suit. There's still some places, though, that haven't gone, for which many of those left are in Africa, and there are more blacks enslaving more blacks today than were ever in North America at any one time. People don't care about that, or the Islamic slave trade whenever it ran across with the Moors, tearing up all the endemic Caucasians there in Carthage and Tunisia and Berbers and everything, and then starting the slave trade and bringing Negroids out of sub-Saharan Africa into the modern world quite rapidly. And so there's quite a different look at history than what's tried to be projected today. And I still don't like the smell of this.
it means to be a man or a woman. So there's lots that we pack into these categories, whether they're racial or religious.
That's neat. But so blacks didn't have anything to do with any of the Bible or anything. So where does that leave them other than trying to grasp onto somebody else's religion? I don't know. So race wasn't an issue until 18th century. I call BS. Cultural Marxism is one hell of a drug, saying literally nothing. Yeah, I think I alluded to that. Racism did not exist because racism was invented in the 18th century. I can believe how profoundly stupid this woman is. Marxist historians are the biggest joke in history. She calls herself Professor Lol. Race hadn't been invented yet, so genetic differences in races were an invention. See how this all falls apart, and when people try to push a narrative on people that breathe in and out oxygen, it's amazing. I gave it a chance and it failed. To quote David Byrne, you're talking a lot, but you're saying nothing. Oh man, to quote James Brown, talking loud and saying nothing. Science is a kind of gospel truth. What a load of rubbish. Science as a method was never claimed to be the unchanging truth. Science is constantly revealing new truths and invalidating old truths or old concepts. There's no concept of unchanging, immutable truth in science, for science just is. And I won't read the rest of that, but yeah, there's some reality. This woman's very confused, it says here. It's strange when people explain nothing with such confidence. My brain started shrinking and I was going cross-eyed. It's quite amazing how completely ignorant this person is of history. According to her, racism didn't exist before the 18th century. Let's contrast her fact with a free claim with some actual historical evidence. And people go 26 deep, but I've won enough of it, and it's just cultural Marxism, hell of a drug. Yes, this needs to be ended. This whole communist Marxism ideal of everybody wee whippy, because that is not America. That can be some other country that has failed over and over in front of us, but we're not going to gimp out into this ideal, no matter how much the UN wants to push it, and other people like Democrats want to try to ruin the world. It seems right now they're being exposed for, they don't have any sense for what cause and effects they're trying to bring. They just want a pity party and throw money at it. If there was a point in there, I missed it. Quite a professor you've got there, Big Think. Can a genetic and observable difference in groups be invented? Thanks a lot, Marxism. Thanks to white people, she is professor. Yes, that is from a Caucasian learning, and somehow she ended up at the point she's at now. Can this show that there's a fail in the system? Watching this while drinking a nice glass of milk. Wow, this was like a train wreck. I just couldn't look away. But as nice, as educated as this woman appears to be, either she or the creators of this channel have applied very misleading title to it. She did not even address the topic. And no, she really didn't address the topic, and of course it appeared to be geared the world before white people, for there isn't a world before white people. Caucasians seem to have come about for a long way, and we found out recently genetics of a Cro-Magnon man some 27,000 years BC is exactly the same as people still living today, and those amazing Caucasians. I heard they can fly now and go into space, and yet there's a lot of third worlders that are jealous of it. They want to move into the country, and we've been having a problem with illegal aliens for many decades. And everybody wants to come into America for its opportunities, but what Americans aren't realizing by that giving fact is that they're taking away one from an American whenever they give one away to someone else who is not an American. And the Americans should always come first, not third and looking back. And that's the strange disconnect we live in today with the way people are trying to think of, oh, you're okay, help these people out. And it's like, we're not really that okay, and who said we were Superman of the world? Stop this idiocy. If the founding fathers of America were to be raised from the dead, they would go crazy about this. This is not at all what the Americas were supposed to have been in any way, shape, or form. Anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. And Big Think apparently is small-minded and misdirected. Isn't that terrible that things like this come out? How many people have looked at this? 129,000. Oh, wait. But 1,090 up-fingered it. So, man, that's a small amount. But 2,000, more than 2.5 times, downvoted it. And I'm going to go with that one, too. So, this isn't real good. And false pressed dichotomy. It's starting to go away now, but I still smell it. I think I might open a window or take a walk while I'm letting the area air out. Like, share, and subscribe, guys. Peace. Enjoy.